Hello everybody, so in this video I want to talk about my process when it comes to balancing big complex orchestral sessions, something like that for example. Because the thing is, even though the composer might have done a good job with the dynamics and everything, you can always improve the balance, right? But how do you even start when you have a really complex session? So this is what I want to talk about. Now, personally, I would break it down by section because otherwise it's just too overwhelming. You can't just start and be like, okay, I'm gonna balance the bass pick or the cello pick within the whole mix, you know, within the whole brass and everything, because you're not really gonna hear what you're trying to balance. This might work in a smaller mix, but in this case of big session, it's just unrealistic to try to balance one specific element among everything else. So first, you wanna start with the individual sections. So you wanna solo your strings, for example, and then what I would personally recommend is starting with the loudest part, so where you have the most stuff at the same time. I don't know, somewhere like that. And you're gonna have a pretty good picture of the whole strings usually when you start at the busiest part. You're gonna have some low strings, some high strings, right? And then start doing some macro moves. So you're gonna try to figure out if the low strings are balanced compared to the high strings and do your tweaks there. For example, here I lowered -3 dB on this big string ensemble because it was already quite loud. So I felt like I could start with a -3 on the whole stem and do this, you know, for everything. So some of them I didn't touch, I mean most of them, but some tracks you can see I just turned +1, the violin legato. Probably because it was too weak. Actually, the leads were a bit weak. So yeah, broad moves, right, for the entire stems. Then the step 2 is to kind of go more into detail. So you're gonna chop different parts. So it might be balanced for the first half of the track, or I don't know, the first part, but you might have more content on that stem later. For example, actually for these tremolos, I have +1 dB as you can see here, compared to the last part. That's because I wanted a bit more power out of this crescendo. Same thing here for the brass, there is actually more moves like that. Some I didn't even touch, but as you can see, -3 dB here, -1.5, you know. So do the more micro moves and just try to select individual parts that feel like they're not balanced properly. And that way you're gonna kind of fine tune the balance more within individual sections. Now for this more in-depth tuning, I wouldn't recommend moving the faders or automating the faders because you don't wanna lock your volume into a set position. You don't wanna lock your faders with automation because then you're not gonna be able to just turn up and down the tracks overall. And it's kind of limiting in my opinion. So I would highly recommend clip gain or chopping entire sections and then turn them up or down. In Pro Tools it's called clip gain, in other DAWs it might be called something else, but essentially just chop the waveform and turn it up and down, and that way you can really keep the editing there, you know, in the timeline, and you still have control over your overall volume, and you can do automation later, or you can use a trim plugin for automation like I do because I think it's practical. And then of course you can do the last thing, which is automation, so curves and stuff like that. You know, it kind of comes last once you've got your overall balance sitting right. But okay, the point is once you've done these steps, you should have the strings sitting pretty good within themselves. So you're gonna have nice low strings balanced with the high strings, and it's all gonna sit pretty good. And what you can do then is balance the brass like that the same way, balance the woodwinds and the percussion. I would actually start with the harmonic instruments first, right? Because I think it makes more sense to kind of mix the percussion around the chords, in my opinion. And so once you've got all these sections balanced individually, then you can balance them with each other. So balancing the strings with the brass, with the woodwinds. Generally, it's gonna stack really well. Because the thing is, you both have low and high instruments within the strings usually for complex pieces. So if you balance that well within these individual sections, once you stack them, it's gonna sit pretty good. So yeah, once you've done this, of course, it doesn't mean you're done. If you feel like, oh, okay, I have only high brass in this part, so my strings are actually too thin, well, just raise your bass and make the strings extra fat, because the brass is just more mid-rangey, doesn't really have too much low brass. Of course, you can make the strings bassier than you would to sort of compensate for that, you know? And that's the last kind of 20%. But if you get the balance right within the individual sections, you're gonna get the most of it there, if that makes sense. So guys, to sort of recap, start balancing individual sections, then start at the busiest parts and do macro moves, you know, just to get the overall balance. Then do more micro moves, turn individual sections up or down as needed. So in 20-second sections, you know, different blocks, I would say. Then once these sections sit good within themselves, you can balance them between each other. So strings and brass together, and you get that balance to be pretty good. And then fine-tune the balance listening to everything together. So you might find like, oh, I need to boost this particular violin lead based on the whole concept of the track. You know, maybe you have a very dense brass at this point, and you feel like the balance you did just listening to the strings isn't quite right. But at least you have a more clear vision, you know? And so fine-tune the balance, do the last 20%. And yeah, automation generally comes last. Once you feel like, okay, my balance is good, but it just isn't cutting it, I need to boost this particular slope here, and do this last, you know? So guys, I think that if you apply this, it will make the process of balancing complex sessions way easier and way quicker. Of course, you could kind of stumble, go back and forth, and you know, you might get the balance that you want in the end, but the thing is it might be way more complex and more long to do that. If you have a workflow like that, I think you're going to achieve your goals way quicker, and you're going to achieve the balance you have in your brain way quicker. So guys, I hope that was useful, and don't hesitate if you have any questions to ask in the comments. Alright, thanks for watching guys, and bye bye!